Hi, everyone. This is Ali John Chaudhry, psychotherapist, and I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman, author of Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, Sibling Estrangement, and the Road to Reconciliation. It's so wonderful to have you here, Fern.
It's great to be with you, and that title is a mouthful.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But you got it right. Thank you.
I did. It's a wonderful book. I love the book. It's a very easy read, but a very compelling read as well in terms of shedding light, of course, on everything that sibling estrangement entails. So today's episode is very important because we're going to be talking about enabling. And enabling can be many different things because there's many different ways that people can respond to toxic behaviors by their sibling, which can be helpful, of course, but there's also what we'd like to discuss today, which are different ways that we can deal with adversity that, unbeknownst to us, can cause us to unfortunately fall into the enabling behaviors that will, of course, take away from our own experience and perhaps strengthen and embolden our difficult sibling or narcissistic sibling. So what we want to do is we want to highlight some of these patterns so that way we can shed light on some of the unhealthy outcomes that come out of this. So,
well, enabling can start very, very young. And I'm aware of this because my mother, and I've actually written quite a bit about her in other books. My mother was sent as an unaccompanied minor at the age of 12 from Nazi Germany to America. She was placed in an unloving home. And this is actually not that uncommon for people like my mother. Instead of it being incorporated into the family, she was actually used as a household servant. And that really set a pattern of enabling, because when she grew up without self-awareness of what she was doing, she enabled the narcissists in her universe. And it was a very dangerous pattern. And even to this day, she's 96 years old, and she lacks a sense of self because of this. Wow. So I think it's a really important topic and one which doesn't get enough attention.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that we don't realize at which point enabling can have far-reaching consequences in our lives, and I do think that it's important for our viewers to understand exactly what type of behaviors can be healthy and how some of those healthy behaviors can fall into unhealthy patterns as well if we're not careful. So a good way to do that is actually to talk about people's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. Now, this last one, the fawn response, is something that's fairly new to me. So I actually liked what I had researched with regards to this, because I think a lot of people might not necessarily be aware that this is also a defense mechanism that we can have. So, yeah.
A lot of these patterns, I think, are established in very young life. So it's hard to break out of them unless you're aware. And I think part of what we're trying to do here is to help viewers to identify what are their tendencies and how can they change their behaviors.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is right now. It's about identifying in a lot of ways what is unhelpful for us. What is it that we tend to do that can create a negative outcome for ourselves, that can perpetuate things or create undesirable results for us into the future. So you're absolutely right. I think that that's the reason why this is so important, is that we need to identify and shed light on this. So how about if we start us off then right now with regards to getting into some of this. The first response that I think a lot of people have is a fight response. Now, a fight response can be basically, for example, narcissists will typically want to control those around them in various ways, right? And on a spectrum, this can be as benign as shifting the conversation towards them as it is to rage against others when they don't get what they want. So narcissists can very much be into fight mode as well, And it's not usually the fight response that is a problem with ourselves, because when you're fighting as another person that's responding to a narcissist, you're finding your voice. You know, you're making your needs known, and you're not standing for certain behaviors basically within your family, which is its own healthy goal and expression. But
So I just want to interrupt you for one
sure.
second, but it seems to me that there is this narcissistic tendency, which is to have dukes up for everything. And actually, some call narcissism an antagonistic personality disorder because they are so quick to jump at their rage and activate their rage. But what you're saying as well is that we don't want to let that go unchecked.
Pretty much, that's the thing. And there are healthy expressions of that, as we've just said. And that's the thing that's important, especially, but there are unhealthy expressions as well, right? And on the extreme side, if we're not careful, we can become bullies just like them. And if we start to match that toxic behavior and go into a tit-for-tat defense move with them, that can actually have the reverse effect of what we're looking for. So it's always good to make sure that your fight side is strategic and well placed. And at the same time, to limit our expectations for change with regards to our difficult siblings. So.
That's interesting. I think it's important also to say that you may not fall squarely into one category. You may overlap into fight or flight. And I think we would love it if these things were clean, but they're not. So it's important to, yes, identify your tendencies and also recognize that you may have two of these or three.
You're absolutely right, Fern. It's not clear cut, and it's not basically that when you're doing one, you're excluding the others. No, it can be more than one. And perhaps in a future episode, we'll see how some of them interact with one another as well. You know, okay. So that may be something that we can do, of course. But I think it's good that we identify them so far, and yeah, maybe our viewers will see themselves in more than one, you know. So the flight response, people with that particular response have a tendency towards moving. And I always like the analogy of the bird that's flapping its wings, because, you know, if it has to continue, otherwise what ends up happening is it just starts to glide and then eventually it falls, you know. And it's similar for people that are in flight mode, because they consider, I think it's important to consider a difficult sibling at home or at family get-togethers, and remember how they can somehow throw their weight around in a narcissistic type of way. And a lot of people, what they'll do as a response is they'll focus on perfection as a means to control what's happening. So that can mean, for example, getting lost at work or in a task at home or something, you know, or any other any other activity that can be deemed as excessive. So usually that can be accompanied in a family that has the belief that little or a lot is never enough. So you see this sometimes in some families where people adopt the strategy of having to work harder somehow or prove their worth, right? And you're always constantly having to evaluate your value in that particular family system. So the danger with that is that it can sometimes translate as overzealousness, rushing into everything that you do, being busy all the time with something, or engaging in high intensity or ambitious activities. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you think about it, this again relates back to the story I told at the beginning, that early patterns of behavior set the tone.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's the thing. We always seek validation from our environment, but the problem is that if that validation is very conditional, then that can make that we can sometimes think that we have to work extra hard at getting the reward, you know. Now, I'm not dismissing working hard. I think that it's a healthy expression when you get a sense of accomplishment. I think that there can be good things that come out of this type of response, provided it's healthy, right? But as with any type of pattern, if you fall into obsession, what you can do is you can focus exclusively on your goal to the detriment of everything else, right? And if you start to do that, there can be a sense of unevenness, which can leave other areas underdeveloped. And in particular, the sibling estrangement, you might be underdeveloped in conflict management, assertiveness, boundary setting, because you're using the singular strategy of drowning yourself in one single all-consuming activity.
Or because there was no modeling for negotiating differences in your original family. And as a result, you don't know how to rise above and reach your sibling in a constructive way.
Exactly. So it can be poor choices and strategies in some ways, or just a one-size-fits-all strategy that can sometimes take up all the room and not necessarily fit for all situations. But you need to adapt in different situations. You need to be fluid, right? And that's the thing I think that can be missing in some families when it comes to sibling estrangement. A lot of families don't identify it or learn to deal with it and tackle it early on and give tools to kids to get along, especially. And
or everybody gets sucked into the narcissistic pattern.
yeah, exactly. So everybody buys into it. Everybody enables it from their own vantage point. Parents can enable it also in different ways too, by basically just allowing it to perpetuate itself or taking sides. So I think that there's a lot of different things here that could be discussed about this. But again, we might have to do some future episodes on some of this, of course, again, as we move along. But I do think, though, that it's important to look at some of the other responses that people can have also. And one of those other responses is what's called the freeze response. Now, when you tend to go into freeze, like this behavior manifests in different ways. And one of those ways is to go deep inside of yourself and avoid stirring the waters in the family. Other ways can be to isolate yourself, even just space out, when something's happening, and just being afraid in general of any type of change, that could be possible, preferring instead of status quo. And, there's that expression that says basically the devil you know is better than the one you don't, right? So this is a classic example of how people that are in the freeze response tend to respond. And while I would agree partially that stirring the waters sounds like a good plan, what it does do, though, is that it enables people with little regard to continue in their power game, right? So the thing is that you can get so used to this type of stuff that you become completely desensitized to dysfunctional behavior. And I'm thinking here I've seen pictures of Afghanistan where you've got small children that are right beside cannons that were being fired, basically, and the kids have no response. They've become desensitized with regards to that. So that's the freeze response that they have when they hear the cannon. And it's sad because this can happen to us in different ways. And the thing with that is that if we normalize this, it deepens itself even more into catapulting itself into this particular pattern.
Wow, that's scary. I mean, I was thinking about how we often talk about the third eye and the importance of that, but I'm also thinking, if you're that desensitized, do you even have any third eye?
It's a good question, and that's the thing. And I think that it's good to be critical of ourselves, to look at what it is that we're perpetuating and what we're allowing, right? And I think that those are all very important questions, and it's important to be honest with ourselves with regards to some of these behaviors, So, and I want to say also that, freeze can involve like different ways of escaping, like we've mentioned, but it can also be good in the sense that you're hiding to protect yourself in a healthy way. Like when you're walking away from a conversation or something, or basically not necessarily putting light on yourselves. Like this is actually a strategy that some Stoics have actually had by drawing attention away from you as a means of protection, right? So you don't become a lightning rod, so to speak, for in the family and such. So
So this is exactly why life is so complicated, because you can buy into this stuff and it can be dangerous for you, or you can buy into it and it can be protective.
Yeah.
So which way are we going to go?
That's the thing. It's a great question because we have to look at what's healthy and unhealthy with it. And I think just starting with that classic question helps us to move into a good direction, because an unhealthy expression of freeze could be the idea of not showing up to life, right? That's what that ends up doing for us. that we don't participate actively in our success anymore. That's the potential of freeze as it evolves down the road for us. So having a sibling that constantly barrages us and berates us can have adverse effects on our self-esteem, and can cause us to be doubtful of our own abilities to achieve our goals. So we end up self-censoring ourselves if we're not careful.
Right. And those siblings can be so influential, especially because the relationships are so long and they're rooted in childhood.
Absolutely. So exactly. And that's why the pattern can be long-standing, as you say, yes. So I think that that's one of the responses that we can have. Now, people must be asking themselves, what is the fawn response? So what is this exactly? And some authors have done a wonderful job at explaining this. So we're going to try to simplify it and explain it so that way people get what this is exactly. So people with a fawn response will tend to be diplomatic and try to establish a rapport and commonality with their sibling. However disagreeable their sibling or toxic behavior can be, by putting the onus on themselves. Oh, I didn't understand this enough, or basically casting a benefit of doubt, basically onto their sibling. Oh, they're just this, they're just that. So fawns will typically want to buy the peace as another way of enabling toxic behavior. And the thing with this is that you're giving up a lot of yourself, right? Because you fall into merging and people-pleasing tendencies, and that's the thing that we've talked about before about people-pleasing, and it does very much fall into a fawn response. And they figure that basically giving in to families or siblings' demands, when people start to do that, they feel they're not going to be attacked or seen as a threat. And when you start to merge this way with the other individual, what that does is it ends up giving importance more so to the other person. So the potential is that the narcissistic person becomes the driving force in your life, which is exactly what you don't want.
So the way I see this is that enablers can be basically bystanders, and they're facilitating narcissistic behavior. So they become almost the lifeblood for the narcissist. And I think that's a really dangerous path to take. Number one, you support narcissistic behavior, which means we'll see more and more of that. But the second piece of that is you lose your own self-agency. And if you've lost your own self-agency, you start to become like the whale who has run out of food and continues to eat its own blubber. And essentially, you give over more and more chunks of yourself so that you don't know who you are anymore. You're no longer your authentic self.
That is a great analogy, friend. I love that image, actually, because it explains it so well in terms of what it does. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's a great image that our viewers can have. And I think the thing with the fawn response also is like, yeah, it's a long-standing pattern of codependency that you're building, basically. And you're setting yourself up basically to just stifle your identity. And as you said earlier, that your opinion will count for less. When you gave that example with your mom, I think that was something she had learned over time. And this is something that can happen, especially where conditional love is present in some families, with narcissistic parents, for example. And what can end up at worst happening in some cases like this is that if people have children down the road, they can actually contribute to the parentification of their child, basically asking their child what they should be doing in their own lives. So it can have long-standing and far-reaching consequences, which is important for us to know. Mm-hmm.
Right, which not only affect the parent-child relationship, but then even your grandchildren, because all of this is transmitted until somebody in the family stands up and says, I'm changing this pattern of behavior. It's also important to recognize that it's not just within the family, but it's also in the workplace. And, you can play out some of these behaviors in the workplace and it will affect your professional life.
Absolutely. That's not just in your own life, but right, like you said, your work life, your interactions with others, perhaps putting the brakes on opportunities, So we said self-censoring earlier on. So yes, it can have like those type of effects if we're not careful.
And I think the most dangerous place is with the sibling. And the reason I say that is because when we are with our siblings, there's always a tendency to lapse back into childlike behaviors, to regress. And so it's especially challenging to renegotiate the relationship with a sibling.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because again, I think that the challenges are there, and I think that that's something that we need to do also to protect ourselves. So I think that we're almost approaching the end of our session for today. So what I wanted to mention though is that we can give our viewers a few final recommendations with regards to what to do with this, you know, and I think it's a good lead in terms of what you said, in terms of, you know, just learning to establish boundaries and renegotiating, you know, the relationship in different ways. And that those boundaries can be verbal, psychological, physical, you know, and as we were mentioning all throughout the episode, trying to identify what the toxic behavior is that you're perpetuating or going through with regards to yourself. What type of response do you have? A fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response? How does it manifest in your life, in your relationship with your sibling? And to see in some ways what can be done about that, or how it's affecting your overall general life, and seeing what new decision you can make for yourself that you want to improve on instead of repeating the same thing.
You know, I'm always a big proponent of writing things down. And so a little, for those who are really interested in understanding these patterns, it would be helpful to write down what you think you are, where you see the behavior, and how you think you can fix it.
Yeah, I like that good old ABC approach. So maybe just a few more things that I want to just finish up on, and basically that it's okay to displease and make your own decisions, and just to be sure that you don't let your sibling hijack your life, and to be independent, and that it's perfectly okay to take a break and cutting ties if necessary for your own self-preservation. So yeah, absolutely be able to consider those options to empower
you. Know, I think it's important to say here that if you don't know who you are and you don't act as your own agent, it's not going to be a particularly satisfying life. And I've known people who are so caught in enabling that they don't even know what pizza toppings they might prefer because they've lost so much of themselves.
That's good. It's true, though. I mean, it can even affect the simplest of decisions. So I hope that our viewers today find our episode especially enlightening and informative. Our goal, of course, is that you walk away with more strategies, so that way, of course, you feel more empowered, and that you can, of course, become a stronger, healthier person as you walk your path with sibling estrangement. So we're almost approaching the end of our session today, and I just wanted to let our viewers know of certain resources that we have. So there is the siblingestrangement.com website that I have, where there's informative articles that people can read to learn more about sibling estrangement. There is also the Facebook page, Sibling Estrangement, Sharing, Coping, Connecting, which is immensely helpful in terms of some of the posts that people put up, the uplifting nature of the group and such, and just the empowering that comes out of that. And of course, there is the Sibling Estrangement online support group on Zoom, which is, of course, seeing people in real time, getting some advice, breaking isolation, and being able to just talk about sibling estrangement with other people going through the same thing.
And that is growing. And obviously, at some point soon, we will be offering it more than just once a month. I'm actually doing a psychologytoday.com blog, and it is specifically about sibling estrangement. And so that's another resource for our viewers.
Absolutely, and that is a great resource as well, to hear it in the mainstream news media, to be able to read up about it. And very happy with the articles you're doing, Fern.
Thanks. So, well, It's great to be with you, and I always appreciate all the support you give me in the blogs as well as here on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this again, and I already look forward to our next episode.
Me too.
All right, you take care, Fern.
Thank you. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.